Cave dwellers hunted the horse for food. But as humankind evolved, so did its relationship with the horse. Humans began to see the horse as a noble creature, a loyal servant, and a true companion. And so it has been. For 5,000 years, the horse running with us through different lands and civilizations, through time and experience. Today, the services of the horse have been greatly diminished, but the bond between horse and human has never been stronger. Join us as we examine this fascinating relationship in a 6-part series, The Horse. From the beginning of recorded events or telling stories with carved images and pictorials, animals were among the most popular subjects, and the horse was there in all its glory. From prehistory to the 21st century, artists have taken up their tools to draw, paint, sculpt, and photograph horses. The famous cave paintings of France, the enigmatic hieroglyphs in King Tut's tomb in Egypt, the symbolic equine images of the American Plains Indians, abstract horses of modern painters and sculptors. Through the eyes of the artist, there was the horse.
A horse in full gallop is an incredibly exciting image.
I've loved horses from the moment I was born.
The horse is, to me, a symbol of beauty as well as strength and power.
Here we explore the bond between horse and artist, a bond that spans the distances of time and place and every manner of visual expression. The horse, one subject, but there are as many different ways of looking at the horse as there are artists who portray it. In each creation, the artist's vision depicts a different world, and in that world, a different horse. Gerald Squires is a well-known painter whose works are admired for his rich interpretation of the landscape.
I'm not a horse painter as such, but I use the horse in the landscape because I think of the horse as part of the landscape. I never think of it as I don't think of it as a rider of horses, or except when I was a child, but I mean as an adult. I don't think of it that way, and I don't think of horses as in a farm situation. When I think of horses, they're always wild. I never owned a horse myself, right? And a lot of people relate to the horse as a working animal. The horse was always outside of our experience, and where we could look at it and admire it and fear it and appreciate it. I don't have a horse and a man together anywhere in my work. It's either the human or there's a horse. I've never had anybody on horseback or did I ever draw a horse working in hauling wood. Mine is more symbolic than it is in reality. It's more in the mind than it is on the ground.
For Jerry, paintings come from encounters, moments when the landscape and its living elements speak to him. This is how his pale horse came to be.
I saw this horse in a field, and it was a pure white, it's the whitest horse I ever saw in my life. And I stopped suddenly, but it wouldn't, it was on the run, and it kept running round and round and round the field. I was so impressed by this horse. It was just this massive pile of muscle and bone, and it had extreme beauty about it. I had my sketchbook, and I made some drawings. But the horse was so active that there's no way that you could ever make a painting of him that way. So I took photographs of him, and I used photographs for this particular piece here. It was just in a field of almost wheat-like grass. It was late in the fall, and there was just trees there. There was nothing really spectacular about it, but it was the horse that took my interest, and I spent the whole day just painting and drawing him.
American 19th century artist Albert Ryder was inspired by a quote from the Bible. "I looked, and there was a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. Hell followed him."
I found it interesting because Ryder, who was a great artist, 19th century artist, American artist, lived in New York. I mean, he was an urban painter. And his horse was on a racetrack, right? And it's very interesting too, because you can see what he was trying to say. It's a small painting, but it's enormous when it comes to what it's trying to say. It's overpoweringly present when you see it. It's just wonderful. He's got a white horse and a skeleton carrying a scythe, This is the symbol of death, right? And that's what it is to him. And that's what the horse was to him, It's carrying this particular thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that to me. It's in the world of symbolism rather than in the world of reality. And when I saw somebody that actually used that quote and made an actual work of art from it, I decided I'd name my horse. But there's no death on it. It's really about life and the power of life. We were always surrounded by horses. There were horses everywhere. And they were objects of fear at times. Just before the storms, usually, the horses would come, and they'd circle around this particular part of the rock. And you could smell the horses. You could smell the storm and the lightning, And it was such a powerful scene. And I always remembered it as a child. And I never saw anything like it until I was much older, and I'm painting up on the cliffs of Bonavista, and I see the same scene as I saw when I was a child. And I said, well, I've got to paint this.
On a winding road along the Atlantic coast, a horse is taken to its new home. But this is no ordinary horse. The horse's owner is Lubin Boykov, sculptor. Lubin is moving this bronze sculpture of a horse's head from the studio where he created it to a site near his home.
While I was still living in Bulgaria, I was commissioned to do a large sculpture of a 16-foot tall Pegasus horse for a big public space. Later on, when I moved to Canada, I brought back the mold of this horse's head, simply because I liked it a lot, but then I wasn't satisfied with just repeating the piece, so I started reworking it. So this is the second or third incarnation of this project that started 22 years ago. Ever since then, it has had an evolution of its own. It's been placed in different contexts. It was exhibited in Montreal at the Old Port. It's been in Newfoundland, and now it's finally moved here to the Sculpture Garden in Flat Rock in a different context. So in this case, I was somewhat dissatisfied with its previous incarnation and decided to make this bottom section out of steel, out of those very solid, heavy steel bars that are sort of arced, bent, and represent a neck or a foundation or a stream of energy, of which the head becomes a pinnacle.
Lubin Boykov still uses bronze the way it was used in ancient times.
The technical process is called the lost wax process, and it is as old almost as the horse image in human history. It's about 4,000 years old, and it hasn't changed much since. The horse's image, not only in terms of image, but in terms of the energy that the body and the head of a horse emanate, lends itself ideally to that sort of energetic interpretation. It can be very placid and can be very peaceful too, but I think a horse in full gallop is an incredibly exciting image. Well, like with most other work, I had to do research and I had to do sketches. The mold of the head over here, my friend John looked at it and he said, well, you got the teeth wrong. The side teeth shouldn't be there. It's a full row of teeth, and horses are not like this. So I guess my research did not extend all the way to the interiors of the anatomy. So I hope that the exterior was, was performed at a higher level than that.
Leonardo da Vinci was not only an artist, but also a scientist. He studied the muscular movements of animals in order to accurately portray them. Ian Sparks is captivated by da Vinci's unforgettable sketches and studies.
Leonardo had no benefit of photography. And everything was done firsthand with live models that included horses or people or whatever. So he had to be a scientist. He had to discover the basic functions of moving people or animals. His main interest, I think, was in the anatomy, the functioning anatomy, the muscle groups in particular. And to translate that then into his artistic sense, where he wanted to depict not so much the muscle groups and then the horse and whatever, he wanted to depict emotion. He wanted to depict almost like an intangible sense and fury and power and strength and all of these so-called intangible things, but now we had the mechanism to do that. He firmly believes that all of these muscles, analogous muscles in the various species, produce the same kind of effect. But of course with the horse's face, it turned out that it was very dramatic. You have a rearing horse and it's great rage or fury, and all of this to produce this strong emotion. This is his solution to the problem. was to sort of draw painstakingly and then translate into paint on a larger scale or into a sculpture. All of these active muscles producing this sense of very, very heightened emotion.
Sparks uses the elements of line, colour and light to paint what he sees around him. His paintings of horses emphasise action and movement, not in great dramatic scenes, but rather in everyday working situations.
But my experience in Newfoundland is with working horses. These working horses are usually very, very heavy set. They're heavily muscled. They're dense muscled horses. I have done quite a few, many paintings of working horses in Newfoundland, but it's generally always from the same perspective. My main focus was with horses who were hauling logs out of the wood. These very, very strong, heavy set, heavily muscled horses. Or cutting hay. These big, heavy horses were used to haul this hay cutter through hours and hours and hours of hay fields. All of my views are usually from the front because that's where the heavy muscle groups are located. So that studying, and again, I have the benefit of photography, where I can take photo after photo after photo. But with the photo and the lighting, a lot of times I might look and say, well, maybe the photo was wrong. It just doesn't seem right. You're criticizing a photo. And then you have to rely then on your knowledge of these muscle groups.
Horses and people have been so closely associated through history. It's not surprising to find artists giving horses a prominent place in paintings of people going about their daily lives. Artist Clifford George was influenced by painters before him.
You take Cornelius Craigoff when he came to Quebec, for example, a good example of a horse painter. He painted the people of Quebec travelling to and from communities on horse sloughs like we have here. And Craigoff left a great memory and a great legacy to Canada because the Canadian horse was the horse that he painted so much of. The one that now is the Canadian horse.
Although born long after Craigoff was gone, Clifford was a pioneer in his own right.
At an early age, I loved to draw, and of course, my greatest love was horses. Horses were your life, and they're majestic animals, and they signify power and strength, and they're interacting with the community, and the people is what got me involved.
A shortage of supplies was not enough to discourage a young artist's passion for painting the horses that were everywhere around his rural home.
When I wanted to paint in the early days, I didn't know there were any other artists in the world. So the people used to paint their houses in bright colours and all different colours. So I used to take little pill bottles or whatever and go around the community and say, can I have a bit of paint out of your can? And can I have a bit of paint out of your can? Then I'd come home and I'd paint with that. You know, because I didn't know I could create my own.
As he grew older, Clifford dedicated more and more time to applying his talent to drawings and paintings that captured the way of life he saw disappearing around him.
In my day, horsemen passed by every day. I had to go to the next community for a sack of flour from my father and grandfather. I had to go on horse. Molasses, you go on horse. You visit your relatives, you go on horse, and you meet people going back and forth.
The most calamitous change for Clifford came when the Newfoundland pony, his favourite horse, lost its usefulness in rural communities. Many were trucked away to be auctioned off for meat. Clifford's paintings became a symbol of the horse's struggle for survival.
When the meat trucks started coming on there in the early 80s and late 70s, in my community alone, they were loading on the horses and they were being taken away. And it was sort of a scary feeling that made me paint, because I wanted to paint the last of our heritage, the last of our ponies before they all disappeared, so people could say, look boy, this is what they looked like. And it got to the point where that almost happened. And when I'm painting, I think about all that stuff. My favorite medium is watercolor, because watercolor lends itself to everything, the free flowing, and it captures the mood and essence of everything. But my greatest love really is going out on the barrens or going out where the ponies are, sitting down somewhere and just sketching the ponies. You know, I could sketch them all day, because ponies move fast. It's like contour drawing when you're doing figure drawing, and the ponies are moving and moving and moving, and you got to draw really fast. And that's when you really capture the essence of the pony. There's the sketching part of it. Sometimes I don't know what color I'm going to mix. I look at the pony, or I think about a pony, and it comes automatic to me. Like around the mane is black, we all know that, but then when the sun shines on it, you get these beautiful red colors coming out. There's such pretty reds in the Exmoor, Dartmoor. And then of course you get the blueberry roan ponies that are different altogether, with the grey and the black dapple showing through. And then around here now, where the gut comes down around the shafts here. Right here, you're going to get that sun hitting the hair there too, look. See? Up around the stomach right here.
While he was inspired by artists like Krieghoff, Clifford became the source of inspiration for others. Renee Harnham is Clifford's neighbour and fellow artist.
Me and Clifford will go somewhere and we'll sit down and we'll sketch away. And a lot of times paintings end up coming out of those sketches, because you'll bring them home and you'll just end up doing a painting out of them. I enjoy painting every subject, but animals, for whatever reason, I seem to enjoy more. I don't know if I can put more emotion into it than when I do paint like a house or a boat. Like, I enjoy it, but it's not as fun, I should say. Like, to paint an animal to me is just really fun, but animals are my passion, so I think that's why I enjoy it so much more.
Knowledge also goes a long way. Knowledge of the horse as a truly vibrant animal.
I think if you know your subject matter really well, it makes it that much easier when you're painting it. It's not as big of a challenge. Once I have the horse sketched in the way I want him, I mean, a lot of times I don't even use reference, because I just know from my heart where the movement should be and where the muscles will go and the different shading. I'd say probably 60% of what I paint is horses. I usually I get on a horse spree and I'll paint a bunch of horses, then I'll stop and I might paint a boat, and then I'll always go back to a horse if I can't find something that interests me. I always end up painting a horse again and again.
When does the bond between horse and human become a truly artistic inspiration from which comes a purely creative image? Artist Anne Downton carefully clarifies the difference between her friendship with her horse Jamie and her role as an artist when Jamie becomes the artist's visual subject.
The time that I spend with just myself and my horse and focused on him, it's much more about our relationship and my experience with him, both as a competitive, athletic team, as well as him being my pet and spending time with him that way. When I'm photographing him to create artwork, there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, because I'm doing it for a very specific purpose, with my artwork in mind. I also don't tend to photograph my horse necessarily because he's my horse or because of the relationship we have. It's more about the aesthetic that he brings to the piece, or looking for a feeling of movement or just a certain mood that you get from a specific way he might move or position his body. It's only been fairly recently that I've started to explore horse subject matter in my work. As I began becoming very serious about my artwork and creating much more artwork, I did consciously keep my artwork and subject matter very separate from my life with riding and my experiences with horses, until I felt that I reached a maturity or reached a confidence in my work that I felt like I could go back and explore that subject matter. But it was definitely a conscious effort for quite some time to keep them very separate, because I think because so many people knew that that was such a big part of my life, I thought that a lot of people would expect me to automatically go there and explore that as subject matter, and I wanted to discover as much as I could separate from that before I did go back and explore that within my subject matter.
Anne fully appreciates how her visual creations around the horse image and her athletic connection with her own horse create a kind of paradox.
I'm having a really solid understanding of the technical aspects of riding and what we achieve to create, or the whole picture that we achieve to create as a rider, and having a really solid understanding of that, I think, has allowed me to push the image of a horse in more interesting direction or a different direction than what some might be able to see in terms of how I position the horse or the certain angles that I might shoot him at. That might be a bit more unexpected given my knowledge and my background.
Lynn Caldwell uses the camera too. She travels to horse shows worldwide, capturing flattering images of the competing horses.
I've loved horses from the moment I was born. We didn't have horses in the family, but it was just something that I had in me. And I was lucky enough as a teenager to work at a stable. And I was able to buy a horse as a youngster, as a teenager. And I've had horses of my own for about 30 years. Well, I started out actually in the fine art world of doing oil paintings and portraits of horses. I've always loved horses, and my immediate family members are professional artists, and I was encouraged to do that. So I continued on with that and took education in fine arts, everything from pencil drawing, oil painting, pastels, all of that, and had a career for about 20 years in the fine art field. And I kept the photography along with that because I would do my own reference photos for individual animals. And at one point, the photography took off over the painting. And I kept running with that, and now it's become a full-time profession. Getting further into draft horse photography, I just keep getting invited back to draft horse shows. And my work's been appearing in a lot of international publications. When I started taking photos as a youngster, I didn't have anybody to pose the horses for me. So I would be out in the fields and literally waiting for the horses to show themselves in a moment of beauty. It's capturing the charm of the horse. And just over the years, I've just developed that and developed that. And once I switched from film to digital, then I had the opportunity to really sharpen that skill. It's all about timing. It's not so much just letting the camera take 100 shots a second. It's about timing, because the exhibitors want a specific point in the motion of the horse. They want to have the leg at the highest position, and they want the horse to look its very best.
The late 19th century brought drastic changes for both horse people and artists. The invention of the engine changed the way we moved from place to place. And the invention of the camera changed the way we see things. Photography gave artists a new understanding of the way horses move and new ways of creatively responding to them. Horses lost their useful role in society. They were no longer needed for transport, agriculture, and war, but they still kept their importance in other less utilitarian ways. Artists kept their interest in horses and continued to explore the equine world with their new creative tools. Anne uses her camera exclusively for the early stage of her creative process.
I'm really drawn to capturing a moment, so photography is a really great way to do that because it's so instant, especially a moving subject. You can capture many different seconds in time in terms of imagery in that way that I personally might not necessarily be able to capture in the way I'd like to through drawing or through painting. Every now and then I will be looking for something specific or have a general idea in mind of what the type of look I'm going for, but for the most part, because he is a horse, he's an animal with his own mind, and because of the way I photograph him, I just kind of let him do his thing and follow him around and see what comes out of that. It's definitely a big part of the process as well. It's about happy accidents and discovering things I might not have realized before.
By the time she has combined and composed the layers of her image, the horse is sometimes barely visible, but very much present.
My work is definitely about the image as a whole and the horse subject being a part of making up that image as a whole rather than the horse being always the main focal point of the image. It's really about a reference to movement. Movement does go along so well with the image of a horse, or trying to explore a movement through history, through various experiences I've had through my life, and layering those and incorporating those in my work. I go through the process of photographing, then I would review the photographs and manipulate the photographs before I even work with them in a print-based format. So there are definitely a number of stages, a lot of layering involved in my work. Just putting the image itself through that many stages and process does abstract the image, and it takes on a life of its own in terms of the abstraction process it goes to from beginning to end, because I put the images through so many different levels or so many different phases to get to the final product.
For Lynn Caldwell, her photograph is her art. The camera is her brush and canvas.
We would like to thank Livewood Stables for supporting our class here this afternoon.
From time to time, a particular horse will strike me as superb quality. or superb mover. If they have very extreme movement, then it's very fun to photograph horses like that. And that way, you just have that little impulsion to get the best picture you can. But the hardest challenge is the horses that aren't as fancy. I work just as hard or harder to get really good pictures of every horse. And what we like to think is that not everyone can win a red ribbon in every show. Not, there are going to be some red ribbons, but not everyone's going to have one. And we like to think that we can make a nice red ribbon with a beautiful picture for them to take home. The horse industry is very specialized. There's many, many facets of it within light horses and within heavy horses. Each group has their own specific type of showing. I follow the trends of whatever breed is out there. I can shoot any breed of horse at all. Leg position in the photograph's very important. It has to be flattering to the horse. The whole thing is to have a very flattering picture of the horse, to catch it at its best moment. And that may be a 200th of a second.
Their trophy to the winning team.
Every breed is different for horse photography. For example, quarter horses, they like to have their horses looking kind of low and long and almost flat. So when we take pictures of quarter horses, the inside leg of the horse will be forward. And they sort of like to have all of the feet placed outwards. You can see all 4 feet almost all on the ground at the same time. With the draft horses, they want their horses to look up. They like the action to be very high. So to accentuate the shoulder, we look to have the outside leg of the horse as high as possible, the knee action as high as possible. And that is more flattering to that type of action. Well, we have what we call in the draft horses, a term that we've coined for a very special picture is the Holy Grail picture. And that is a 6-horse hitch picture where all 6 pairs of legs on all the horses are up at the same time. It's very, very rare. That's why we call it the Grail. And it has happened. I've been getting a few each year. And with the number of shows, I shoot about 20,000 pictures a year. And you'll get maybe 10 out of the year. But I'm working on it. I used to get 1, and now I'm getting more. And it's a matter of just careful timing, really watching all the legs of the horses and hoping you can get them in that position. And it's not always the winner that will be doing that. And it only happens for a matter, as I say, 200th of a second is when it happens.
Lynn's photography, centered as it is on capturing the exact movements of horses, harkens back to perhaps the first horse photographer of them all, the famous Edward Muybridge. In the 1870s, Muybridge's inventive experiments made photographic history. He was a photographer in England. A racehorse owner commissioned him to answer the question of whether all 4 of a running horse's hooves left the ground at the same time. Muybridge developed a method of photographing a horse in motion using 24 cameras. His series of photos, called The Horse in Motion, is perhaps the first known step in the art of animation, and probably the first confirmation that indeed all 4 hooves do leave the ground. In all likelihood, this is the world's first ever horse movie. In the North American culture, the words movie and horse became intertwined early on in the 20th century. In the popular arts, perhaps no visual medium celebrated the image of the horse more than the American motion picture. From the silent shoot-'em-ups of the 20s and 30s to the romantic westerns and cowboy serials of the 50s and 60s, North Americans grew up on a constant parade of heroic horses across the silver screen. Not even a young boy living in a remote town in Newfoundland escaped this early introduction to the horse as a visual symbol of heroism and loyalty.
Every Saturday we would go to when we had 10 cents, we would go to the Palace Theatre and we'd watch all the cowboy movies like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers and the Durango Kid. And the horse played a big role in all of this, of course. And of course the romanticism of it all, and we'd all be thinking of ourselves as cowboys and And we'd go to the movie theater with cowboy hats on and cap guns and all that sort of stuff. And I always thought of myself, you know, as a young boy, as a cowboy, and as more or less kind of a singing cowboy. And I think the movies had a big influence on our life, and still do, because I have often thought about them, and even now when I see one or so on TV, I'll watch it because it takes you back to when you were a child and those wonderful days, summer, and where horses were very prominent.
Jerry still remembers a favorite childhood cowboy song that celebrates his fantasy horse called Paint.
I'm riding old Paint, I'm leaving Cheyenne, I'm off to Montana just to throw the hula hand. They feed in the coulee and they water in the draw. Their tails are all matted, their backs are all raw. Ride around, little doggy, ride around and slow. For the fiery and snuffy is raring to go.
The role of the horse in our technological age is nowhere near as significant as it was in the past. But even today, for artists, there is something about the horse that acts as a powerful draw. Something about its graceful body and the mysterious soul that compels artists to embrace the horse as a powerful source of artistic inspiration.
I think had a much more special relationship with the horse because we've come to rely upon it in a little bit broader context and set of circumstances than we have relied upon other domestic animals. And we have also developed a spiritual connection simply because we have had to rely upon it to the extent whereby our lives have literally depended on the bond between human and horse. And I think this makes the horse very special in human history, and of course it is reflected throughout the visual art of all cultures up until today.